It's time for our next teaching in the Hall of Faith series, and it's going to be a perfect little place to stop. So this is a breaking point because for the next few weeks I'm going to be doing some videos on our festival edition playlist and talking about the high holidays and the Jewish festivals for about a month or so. And so we're going to have a little break. And this passage today in the Hall of Faith isn't actually going to be about any particular character, but it's going to provide like a perfect little. You know how a great TV series will have like a mid-season break, like there's 22 episodes and 10 episodes in, you'll have a little break in the action, and then you come back a few weeks later or a month later and you pick it up and take it to the finale. That's kind of what this break will serve to do for us today. It's a perfect time in the calendar to do it, and I'm really thrilled of how the passages fell. So with that, I'm just going to get into it. Here's what I want to do. I want to read this passage. First of all, I just want to read this passage. It's one of my favorite paragraphs in the New Testament. It really is. I say that a lot, but this one really is. It's one of my favorite paragraphs in the New Testament. I just want to read it and just appreciate its poetry, its beauty. I just love. It's just a beautifully written paragraph. Then I want to go back and I just want to look at what the paragraph says and kind of pull apart, like, just looking at the substance, kind of the point of the paragraph. Then I want to go back and I want to put the paragraph in its larger context based on what we've learned about Romans 10 and 11 and the themes we've now heard, almost like a broken record, throughout our journey. So that's what I want to do. So let's do that. First of all, let's just read the passage. We're obviously in Hebrews 11. I'm still using, I don't know why this is my Bible that's still here. I'm still using my Christian Standard, CSB. It's not a familiar translation for me, but it'll do the trick today. I'll probably get out my NIV after this when we're back. So we'll see how that goes. But here's what it says. Hebrews 11, I'm going to start in verse 13. These all died in faith, although they had not received the things that were promised. So we're talking about all these people. We're talking about Adam, or we're talking about Abel. We're talking about Noah. We're talking about Enoch. We're talking about Avram and Sarah. We're talking about these characters in the Hall of Faith. And it says all of these people all died in faith, although they had not received the things that were promised. But they saw them from a distance, greeted them, and confessed that they were foreigners and temporary residents on earth. Now those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. But if they were thinking about where they had come from, they would have had an opportunity to return. But they now desire a better place, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. What a verse! What a verse. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Man, if somebody ever wrote a verse like that about you, what an honor that would be. That God would not be ashamed to be called your God. He had prepared a place for you. That is a thing. Let's go back through and let's look at this again. These all died in faith, although they had not received the things that were promised. So all these characters, the Abels, the Enoch, the Avram, the Sarah, the Noah, all these people died in faith. So this thing that we're talking about, this trust that there's something going on, all these people died in that trust. And then just a stunning phrase, having not received the things promised. Like, God promised things, and these people lived in trust and died without tasting, receiving, seeing the fulfillment of that promise. Somebody was just asking the other day in another space that I occupy. They were talking about promises. They were asking about how do we talk about, how do we teach about, how do we preach about, how do we read the promises of God? And one of the things I said is I prefer to talk about the premises and principles rather than the promises, because you and I have a tendency to read and hear promise through the lens of transaction. Like a promise is a transaction. God promised me something, and therefore I can, because I will get that promise, right? A promise is more transactional. So typically, I prefer to talk about the premise of a passage rather than the promise of a passage, or the principle at work here. Because I can stand on a premise, I can live by a principle. I have a tendency to abuse a promise. Doesn't mean that promises are bad. Promises are all throughout Scripture. Paul will say in Galatians, people of the promise. He's going to make a big deal about promise in Galatians chapter 3. I'm not saying that promise itself is bad. I'm saying what we typically do as Westerners is often not a great interaction and relationship with promise. And it's because of what's said here. Like, we almost feel like that's scandalous. Like they died having not received the promise. Like, I thought if you were promised something, like God essentially like swindled them. Like he tricked them out. But that's because we have maybe a pre-conventional, less mature understanding of promise. So all these people died in trust, trusting this thing that God was doing without ever having received the promise. Let's keep reading. But they saw them from a distance and greeted them. So that idea that they saw these promises from a distance, and the expression greet doesn't just mean like an abstract, like, hey, they greet it. To greet is like this warm, like you see somebody and you, hi, like it's this warm greeting. It's not just a passing hello or an acknowledgement. It's more than an acknowledgement. It's this warm greeting. So all these people died in faith, died in this posture of trust, having not received the promise, but they looked out on the horizon of their life. They looked out on the horizon of their progeny. They looked out on the horizon of what God was doing in the world, and they saw the promises not in their life, but out in the distance, and it evoked a warm greet. They like see it and they go, oh, and they wave at it in the distance. Like, this is the posture of faith. This is the posture of faith. They see these promises. Like think about the story of Abraham. Abraham is promised a land. He's promised descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. And yet, he dies with not a huge family, no land in his possession. He doesn't get to see it. But somehow we're told Abraham had this awareness. Abraham looked out on the horizon of what God was doing in the world and went, oh, I'm not even going to get to taste this, but what God is doing is so much better. Which is going to set up the next statement. It's going to set up the next statement. So they greeted them. They saw these promises. They greeted them and confessed that they were foreigners and temporary residents on earth. So they saw these things at a distance, realized that God was doing something else, and they went, I'm not even a part of this. I'm a part of something bigger, something better, something greater. I think our brain automatically goes heaven, which is not necessarily right or wrong, but I don't think they do heaven, earth. I think they simply go, God's kingdom, God's world versus my material, physical existence. Like God's greater kingdom versus my earthly experiences. That's what I think is being said there. Now, those who say such things, like most people don't act like this. Most people don't have this perspective. Most people wouldn't say that. Most people wouldn't take that posture. But people who do make it clear that they're seeking a homeland. Like they make it clear that the world that they're experiencing now is not the end of the story. Like this is not where the story ends. Like I named the middle name of my son is James, or the Hebrew word would be Jacob. And I named him Jacob. The word means heel grasper. Because I always wanted him to be chasing something more. Like, don't settle for what this broken world will offer you. Always be chasing God's better world. That's what we read about here. These people of faith are chasing something, a better homeland. They're chasing something more. If they were thinking about where they came from, they would have had opportunity to return. Like if all these people wanted this world, well, this world is always waiting for them. They could turn around and go back to this world at any point. but they didn't. Like, this world was always ready to receive them with open arms. But Abel, Noah, Enoch, Avram, Sarah, these were people that never decided to go back. They were chasing something on a horizon that they were never even going to see in their lifetime, but they were chasing something better. That's what faithfulness looks like. Faithfulness, biblical trust, the hall of faith is not about people that trusted because they would get something. This is not the prosperity gospel. This is not people would trust because in this life they would be given. These are people who trusted. See, now I'm getting ahead of myself. Come on now. Here we go. But they now desire a better place. They don't want this place. They could have gone back. They could have gone back anytime, but they don't want this place. They want a better place, a heavenly one. And this is why, therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a place for them. Like I picture God like pumping his fist, like, yes, that's what I'm talking about. This is why they're in the hall of faith. Not because they faithed well. They made all kinds of mistakes. Some of these stories are dysfunctional messes. It's not because they got every answer right or were superheroes. It's that they didn't give up. What was the author saying in Hebrews 10? We can't give up. That's why this whole chapter exists. These are people who didn't get. So let's go back and look at this passage one more time with the larger context in view. One last time. Here we go. These all died in faith, although they had not received the things that were promised. They saw them from a distance and greeted them and confessed. So they saw them. So all these people died without receiving. So in the larger context, what did we say that Enoch, what about Enoch? What did we say that Enoch was doing? Enoch was walking in a way. He had some level of awareness. He had some level of submission to some bigger, better, greater reality. Abel. Why was Abel offering sacrifices? Because he looked out and he looked out on a horizon and he said, God is doing something else and it's bigger and it's better. It's better than what I'm experiencing here. I'm going to give myself to this bigger, better thing. Not I'm going to get out of here someday when I die and go to heaven. I'm going to give myself now to a bigger, better reality that's happening right now, but it's even bigger and better than my material, physical experience now. So these people, they see the promises of God, but they realize that the promises of God are bigger than their physical, material experience in front of them. They realize that the promises of God they see them out there, and they go, oh, that's beautiful. That's even better than I would have imagined. And it brings a smile to their face, and they greet them from a distance. And when they see it, they go, I'm a part of that. Like they confess. What does it say? They confess that they are foreigners and temporary residents on earth. They look out, they see what God is doing on some bigger level, some better level, and they say, I'm a part of that. I'm a part of that. I'm not a part of my immediate circumstances. I'm a part of something that's going to exist long after me. Like we always talk about in our world, I want to be about something bigger than myself. Like this is the definition of being about. This paragraph literally tells us about a group of people who were about something bigger than themselves. Like they saw something far bigger, wider, greater than their single solitary physical experience. And I'm not saying getting out of here and going to heaven. I'm talking about in this life that we live here and now, this life is still a part right now of something bigger and better. And this thing that God is doing I might not taste it right now, but I can see it on the horizon, and I give myself to that. Those who say such things make it clear that they're seeking a homeland. If they were thinking about the world which they came, they would have had opportunity to return. Listen, if you want what this world has to offer, if you want only the physical, material, transactional stuff that you and I experience every day, the broken, finite, whatever, it's always here for us, and we can live there and whatever. But the author of Hebrews is calling us to a different kind of faithfulness. The author of Hebrews is saying, these people saw something bigger. These people saw something better. And they didn't even get to taste the promises in this life. But they knew that they were a part of it. And they said, I'm a part of that. And they, what does it say? But they now desire a better place, a heavenly one. Like they say, I'm looking at a different kind of reality that I call home. Not just later, but now. I'm looking at a different reality today, now, that I tap into. A story that I'm a part of now, today. Even before I die, I look out and I say, the things that I'm doing now, I may not even taste the goodness, but I can see the goodness on the horizon. Long after I'm gone, my children, my grandchildren, our descendants, I can see it on the distance, and I'm going to be a part of that. And the author of Hebrews says, that's what you and I have to sign up for. That's why we persevere. When the author of Hebrews, in the first two videos of this series, and we looked at the context, and the author said we cannot be people that shrink back. We have to be people that persevere. I know what it's like to go through suffering. I know that you know what it's like to go through suffering, the author says. The author says, I know that you've stood beside people who suffer. And now as you suffer, you cannot shrink back, because we have to be a part of this thing where all those that have gone before us saw something bigger, better, more transcendent than their immediate circumstances. And they said, I want a better reality. I want a better kingdom. I want a better homeland. Both now, both for my descendants, my children, my grandchildren, for all those people of faith that will come after me 1,000 years from now, should Jesus tarry, I want to be a part of that. I want to build that. And I won't be able to build that if I give up. I will not be able to build that if I look at what this world has to offer and decide that I'm going to return. These were people in the Hall of Faith who didn't return. If they were looking for this world, they could have returned at any moment they wanted to, but they didn't. They kept smiling and greeting from a distance the promises of God. More than acknowledgement. More than just passing, but this warm embrace of the things that God was doing. May that encourage us for our little mid-series break. May that get us through a month or so until we get back to this series. I hope there's something in there for you to chew on and be encouraged by. Look forward to resuming the series. When we get done with the fall festivals, we'll talk to you then.